Welcome to episode 36 of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast, a bi-weekly look at cybersecurity, including interviews, news, expert tips, and the latest trends. I'm Kevin Baxter, and I'm joined by my Firewalls.com colleague, Andrew Harmon.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Andrew. As we tackle a different featured topic each episode, new ones are normally out every other Wednesday, so subscribe or follow on your favorite podcasting platform to get the latest first. Please do rate and review us and drop us a line anytime at podcast@firewalls.com. As always, thanks for listening, and without further ado, it's time to introduce our featured topic for our first episode of 2021.
When you get to year-end or year-beginning shows, you often see a look back at the previous 365 days. But rather than do a retrospective run through the year that was, we thought this edition of Ping would be a good opportunity to look forward. We recently spoke with Mark LaLiberty of WatchGuard's predictions for 2021, but in this episode, we're expanding the scope to see what some of the other industry leaders are prognosticating for the year ahead when it comes to cybersecurity.
Some of these forecasts may make you feel optimistic as the new year begins, while others may look a bit gloomy. But even if some of the predictions scare you, being armed with what to expect ahead of time from some experts in threat intelligence who are in this every day gives you a chance to prepare. So we've compiled a few top predictions from companies including the aforementioned WatchGuard, along with Fortinet, Barracuda, and Sophos. Andrew, what do you want to start us off with here?
Well, let's start off on the user side of things. We've got several different sort of categories of predictions here, but let's start at the endpoints. So with the surge of the digital assistant era, things like Google Assistant, Alexa, Siri, you know, all the names and the friendly voices that we've got around our homes. So now smart home systems are starting to crop up more and more, and everything from, you know, doorbells to room temperatures, locks on doors, automating lights, so forth. And big data is becoming big business in this particular arena. So in this prediction, 2021, we might see some real pushback from the market in terms of IoT device manufacturers seeing some real backlash against the collection of personal data, as well as a push for government representatives to start, you know, crafting some laws and regulations around how these devices protect our user data and actually collect that information about us.
Yeah, I think we really have seen a trend in that direction already, and a little tease coming up. We have a story in our headline segment that's probably another reason why that trend will continue. But initially, as we've said, IoT devices were really all about the convenience, about like this new thing that you could get out of them that you didn't have previously.
Right.
But initially, a lot of them were not built with the whole security in mind, and maybe didn't even conceive of a world in which people would target them, but now we know that they do.
And I feel like this is a class of devices that really sort of promotes the sort of early adapters buying into it. So you get this cool new thing where suddenly you get Wi-Fi in your refrigerator and everybody wants to be the very first one to get it, and that first wave is often the least secured version of those products. So
yeah,
it seems to be a market ripe with sort of vulnerability because of that.
Yeah, it's a combination of the first wave of products by more reputable places, and then the second wave of products or third wave of products for people who still want to get in on what these services have to offer, but are maybe finding like the cheap knockoffs that really just don't care at all about.
Yeah, they don't care about your security.
Yeah.
So, you know, so far, many of the customers buying these have been somewhat unaware, or at least not so vocal about the security concerns. But it seems in 2021 that the predictions are saying we might see that reverse and start trending towards people voicing those concerns and demanding more secure IoT devices.
Yeah, and we have heard that from experts here over the last couple of months, that there are starting to be some standards put into place, and some countries are getting, some governments are getting involved in some of these places as well. So yeah, I think it definitely makes sense that this is going to continue, because these devices are still going to keep coming out. And as we know, security is always a concern. In fact, I wanted to kind of bounce off of this with Sophos also mentioned in their predictions for the coming year a reminder about other non-traditional devices being targeted, and in particular, like smartphones. The Android store has a continued issue with potential malware coming through, basically malicious apps, but also adware and things of that nature. So that's another area that we may not talk about as much, but bounces off the IoT side of things, but also on your phone. Pay attention there too.
Right. There's been many cases through 2020 and years before of, large apps that really hit the App Store and turned out to be maybe not so safe in the end. So
yeah.
I assume, yes, we will continue to see that. And I'm sure we'll also see a reciprocal sort of crackdown on the part of Google where they take under their responsibility, monitoring those marketplaces just as much as the user's responsibility to sort of regulate their own downloads.
Yeah, it's an ongoing battle, I think, for like the Google Play Store and the App Store from Apple to try to head off any of those malicious apps because they don't want them on there anyway. But it's an ongoing battle with the app developers who are trying to circumvent whatever rules that those places put in place. So we'll have to keep watching that. But again, just vigilance on all fronts really there for a consumer going forward. Another prediction for 2021. Let's jump into some ransomware stuff because we know that ransomware is not going anywhere either. Leveraging ransomware in critical infrastructures. So we know it's continuing to evolve, and IT systems are increasingly converging with operational technology or OT systems, something that we have mentioned a little bit before. Particularly critical infrastructure, and now there will be even more data, devices, and unfortunately lives at risk, because if ransomware gets into an OT system or malware gets into an OT system, then that's actually controlling some sort of physical environment potentially that could cause problems.
Right, and we've seen something developing in this way throughout 2020. For instance, we had the first death recorded from ransomware with a hospital being sort of locked down and unable to assist patients. And then if you start extrapolating that thinking out to, power systems and dams and all sorts of different critical infrastructure, that could cause not only, cost to the infrastructure itself, but to human lives, to businesses, all sorts of things.
Yeah, it's a very slippery slope. And once they get into those types of areas, if the systems are not set up properly, separated properly, there's definitely a chance of something hacking there that goes beyond simple pay me and we'll give you your files back kind of stuff. So extortion, defamation, and defacement are already the well-known tools of the ransomware trade. And of course, that extortion has added on to threats of making data public for people, exposing their data. That's a little bit of an evolution that we've seen this year as well. But when you move even more forward with this OT side of things, human lives will be at risk when field devices and sensors at the operational technology edge, which include critical infrastructures, increasingly become targets of cyber criminals. So, as you said, hospitals, obviously, we know that seems to be a favorite.
Keep in mind, we're talking about all of this in the wake of the SolarWinds attack, which we will cover a little bit later in our headlines segment. But that's appearing to be a larger and larger hack than first thought, with many federal agencies and businesses, including Fortune 500 companies, seemingly being affected by all this. And so when you sort of think about, wow, how all these different lines are getting blurred between government and critical infrastructure and even private home networks, you can definitely see how this all sort of spirals out of control as those systems become more interconnected. Unless, of course, a viable security solution is put in place.
Right. What's number 3 for you? Where do you want to go next?
Let's talk about secure remote access. One of the bigger topics of 2020, of course, as we all know. There is a pretty big shift in workers moving from the on-premise work to, home offices, working from home. So remote workers, cloud-delivered services, all of these becoming, de facto parts of everyday business for most every company now. And looks like zero trust solutions will be the key to ensuring that as we move forward in this new normal, as we've said 1,000 times on this show this year. But as we move forward in the new year, and we have to deal with these new realities. Zero trust systems and protocols and strategies based on those types of trust solutions will be an effective means to sort of helping with this security challenge.
Technically, that was the first time we said it this year, so
that's true.
That makes you feel better.
It is. I'm also glad to be the first.
Everyone is dealing with remote access, and that's at the very least continuing for a while into the foreseeable future. And we know that the fact that people have shifted to remote work has made it such that even when the pandemic threat is really mostly over, people will still want to be working from home more than they ever had before. So it's imperative that employers have security set up to maximize the security of their remote access. And zero trust has really been, one of the key layers of that layered security approach.
Right. I think when that shift first occurred, a lot of places were still relying on the VPNs and other, remote solutions like that, which were a little bit cumbersome and complicated to set up, especially if you're dealing with employees that may not be quite as tech savvy, and, you've got to kind of work with them over the phone to get all this set up remotely and walk them through step by step. So 2021, we'll probably see, more lightweight clients, very network friendly, less resources being utilized, less setup, less configuration, more of a plug and play experience that users will be able to use much more quickly and easily from home without draining as many resources.
Yeah, it was a combination of either the resource heavy stuff for the people who were very concerned about security, and then basically no solution at all, and just saying like, hop on your home computer and start working some more.
Right. Yeah. You've just put in your Wi-Fi at home. You'll be fine.
But yes, we've seen an evolution in both approaches, so that now I think we may be converging on the same type of solution for both areas. But of course, zero trust really means how you go about signing in and things of that nature. So you don't want your computers, your network set up with the idea that, oh, this is definitely Johnny Jones's computer, so we'll just let it right in with no questions asked. You have that zero trust layer in place so that you really make sure.
Verify that it really is Johnny Jones.
Don't trust but verify, basically, is how that's been worded before.
Right. So I'd like to sort of combine a couple of these predictions that I saw across a few different of the manufacturer prediction articles that we're pulling all of this from. And really the theme here is how new technologies emerging in 2021 will sort of change the strategies of attackers and how they will launch those attacks, specifically spear phishing campaigns with all these automated email and social media scraping tools, as well as the emergence of 5G and what that means for new capabilities for bot swarms and more sophisticated large volumetric attacks.
We know both of those are going to be major issues moving forward. And 5G, we're still really learning about the impact that we'll fully get from the changeover to 5G-enabled devices. But, basically just the bandwidth that offers, both for good and for bad, is something to watch.
Right. So swarm technologies, these large gatherings of sort of zombie devices, often require a ton of processing power just to keep the whole cloud moving, so to speak. But now with 5G, there's more room on that information highway, more lanes where you could stuff all these bots and swarms and move things more easily, to the point where hackers are now sort of building subgroups into their swarms to give certain bots more specialized skills. So, you have a certain group of bots that are, targeting one area of the network, while a completely separate group are programmed to target a different amount and more intelligently target and attack what they're trying to breach.
You got to also think that it opens up the possibility for hackers to not even necessarily have to go after people's devices, but maybe just, gather up a bunch of 5G devices and
just build an army.
Yeah, build it yourself. Cut out the middleman, basically.
Right, and then on the ransomware side of things, like I said, you've got all these new automated tools as far as, writing emails, scraping social media and websites to find information and build more personalized spear phishing campaigns on the fly without so many manual processes as far as writing emails and researching targets. A lot of that can be automated, and so we could see the volume of phishing attacks cranking right back up, which is a little ironic because, one of the big themes early in 2020 was that the volumetric attacks are on the down slope, while the more targeted and manually processed attacks are increasing. So now we seem to get the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, basically it's combining the two. It's not just spray and pray volume where you're not very targeted, but you're still getting the targeted aspect, but you can also target as many people as you want, basically, by leveraging AI and things of that nature. We talk about AI as a security solution, but the bad guys are using it too.
Right. So there's always a little bit of trade-off. Researchers were hopeful that, even if they are able to use these automation tools to better personalize emails, the overall quality of these emails might still not be up to snuff with the more manually handwritten ones, which makes sense. If you have the time to sit down and write a very targeted email, it's going to be more than if you just plug in different names and job titles into a pre-written format.
Yeah, it's relying on people who may be paying a little bit more attention, but not enough more attention to still get caught here. But I mean, certainly you'd think it would raise the odds of a successful phishing campaign if there are at least a few cues that make it look more legitimate than just dear guy or dear
hello friend, I need an iTunes gift card for work.
Yeah. Last one we'll touch in this segment, and I think this kind of dovetails with a lot of things we talk about too, is pinpointing those security gaps in legacy endpoints, because we know many people are still running older versions of operating systems, things of that nature. So this one particularly, it kind of relates to the pandemic too, again, where people were just using what they have. Mm-hmm. A lot of offices had moved past the legacy endpoints, but then when you start using your remote workers, whatever they may have available is maybe a bit older in some cases. So Windows 7 in particular has still been a pretty popular operating system, and Microsoft had initially planned to stop supporting it, but then they extended support for versions of that and Server 2008 a bit longer because of just how prevalent it is and, how much people are still using it. They didn't want to leave everybody high and dry.
Right.
But it's something that people are using.
Yeah, and Windows 8 was a pretty big flop, and so if you consider the big time period between Windows 7, which was the more popular OS, and the current Windows 10, there's probably quite a few people stuck on the other side of that time gap that very likely aren't updating often and will no longer be able to as soon as Microsoft decides it's comfortable pulling that plug.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people were able to update from 8 to 10, but if you have a 7 operating system, maybe your computer doesn't really support 10's features fully, or it might not work the same way. So there are reasons why people might have kept Windows 7 instead. But we know that there are always vulnerabilities in any operating system out there. Microsoft rather, is pretty proactive in trying to patch those vulnerabilities and get them as quickly as possible. We've had a couple come up over the past year that we've heard about. And of course, the SolarWinds attack is sort of tangentially related in that way too.
That one was the cause of an update, so maybe not maybe not exactly an inspiring story.
Yeah. But yeah, we know that those endpoints are still getting targeted. People in general, as far as the remote workforce out there, hackers know that everyone's out there working remotely. We talked about zero trust, but this is another aspect of how that remote workforce is more vulnerable.
Right. You might have a $1 million endpoint system at your place of work, but when you go home and you've got your old Bitdefender or whatever from 2005 and you haven't updated your Windows 7, you completely different ballgame.
Yeah, so for one, hopefully Microsoft keeps in mind the special circumstances we're under and helps out. But certainly as a business, you need to make sure that you have other security measures in place to stay buttoned up as much as possible and make sure that your users are staying updated as much as they can. When there are patches, get those on your computer as soon as possible to stop those vulnerabilities from stopping you.
Right.
So those are just a few. We have more that we could go through on our 2021 predictions. We'll have links to the various manufacturers' 2021 security predictions as well. If you look in the description, we also, again, point back to the podcast we just did a couple episodes ago with Mark Liberty to go more in depth on WatchGuard's predictions in particular. But, while we're looking ahead at 2021, do you have any predictions or resolutions or anything you wanted to share before we leave this segment?
Specifically about cybersecurity? No, not that I can think.
All right. Anything in general, though.
I'll get back to you next episode with that.
Okay, yeah.
What have you got this year? Any big resolutions?
I don't really have
your
any.
Windows 7?
3.1 all the way for me.
I like XP.
I think looking forward, it's just time to hopefully allow ourselves to be optimistic again, and we'll hopefully we have reason to be optimistic. Now it's time for headlines. In this regular segment, we take a closer look at a few top stories in the cybersecurity world and discuss what they may mean to you. On to headline number 1. SolarWinds hack may be much worse than originally feared. Now, first of all, I don't know if that's possible because when we talked about this about a month ago, people did fear pretty...
They took it pretty serious, yeah. I wasn't really doubting anybody, ignoring it. So.
No, I think people feared, definitely. Right. It actually seemed, in looking at a couple of pieces that were written in the last couple of days about this, that maybe people feared at the beginning and then started to go, well, maybe this isn't so bad after all.
Right, and I remember when we originally talked about this story, we had mentioned that maybe a few government agencies had some breaches, but it's now looking like perhaps up to 250 federal agency and businesses now believed to be affected, according to the New York Times. So that's an order of magnitude larger than what we were speaking of last.
A little bit, yeah. At the time, there was a lot of discussion that there were likely more that had been affected, and now we know at least a higher baseline has been established over the attack that went on for 9 months, according to the Times, though still unclear whether there's sort of an ongoing aspect to it or not. But we did know already that the seeds had been planted earlier.
There's definitely some vagueness to it. So the hack, which compromised SolarWinds' Orion monitoring and management system, allowed attackers to basically impersonate any organization's existing users or accounts, including highly privileged accounts. So pretty God mode hack here.
Yeah, and God mode was what was used in our previous story on this. The Times reports that Russia exploited layers of the supply chain to access the agency's systems, and that early warning sensors that Cyber Command and the National Security Agency placed inside foreign networks to detect potential attacks appear to have failed. Also, they point out that maybe everyone was so focused on election security that they maybe neglected some other aspects of cybersecurity.
Yeah, there were definitely a few other things going on in 2020 that we were worrying about. So I guess it makes sense that, supply chain attacks weren't exactly up high on that list of things to be keeping an eye out for.
Yeah. Though, again, when you know that the genesis of this was, in March or so?
Right.
You wonder why there wasn't a little more focus on that at the time. But I think another key element of the updates in the last couple of days have been the revelations that the Russian hackers who staged these attacks did so from servers inside the U.S. rather than located elsewhere, sometimes even using computers in the same town or city as the victims, according to FireEye. So why does that matter so much?
Right, and so basically there are some laws in place, which are probably pretty good laws, that prevent the NSA and other, community of intelligence people from spying on domestic networks, which is, again, probably a smart move. So the idea being that rather than seeing all these attacks coming from a foreign network because they were launched from inside the United States, we were not able to spy on these processes and catch them in time, thus those sensors that you mentioned failing, which I really wish they went a little more into detail about these. Sensors that they've apparently embedded in foreign networks, but because the call was coming from inside the house, so to speak, couldn't really trace it.
Yeah, we might need to see if we can get more information on that in a future episode. But there'll probably be another push now, too, from some corners to increase that domestic spying that we've worked so hard to decrease.
Jolly.
Yeah. So Microsoft said earlier this week it had discovered its systems were infiltrated beyond just the presence of malicious SolarWinds code, and hackers were actually able to view source code in a number of source code repositories, but the hacked account granting access didn't have permission to modify any code or systems. And in a little bit of good news beyond that, Microsoft said it didn't find any evidence of access to production services or customer data, and no indications that Microsoft systems were used to attack others.
And put a little asterisk on there for so far. Further updates to come.
Yeah, everything in this story is still a so far, I think. In fact, we may not know the full implications of the attack for many, many years to come.
Right. So Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee, told the Times that the hack looks much, much worse than he was first fearing, and the size continues to keep expanding. It's clear that the United States government missed it. So, again, this is likely a story that we might have a part 3 on.
Yeah, at least. I mean, experts are still sort of debating what it means, because I think what's been initially accepted is sort of a flexing of the muscles per se, like look at what we can do by the hackers, and also that they were able to sort of observe processes and get some information, but we don't know of anything that particularly has been changed or affected even beyond the observation stage at this point. But a lot of people wonder if there's still some back doors that will be opened in a date to be determined.
Right. If this was just a proof of concept, what's the concept exactly? So you don't just do a proof of concept to say, hey, we did it, and move on with your life. So
yeah, as you said, more to come. Now, headline number 2. Why companies should stop scaring employees about cybersecurity. Or should I have read it? Why companies should stop scaring employees about cybersecurity. That sounds better. So in this piece by Karen Renaud of Scotland's Abertay University, she suggests her research with Mark Dupuy of the University of Washington shows that while fear tactics might get employees to take action on cybersecurity in the short term, its effectiveness wears off in the long term.
I certainly hope we don't scare any of our listeners out there, even though we do talk about some pretty scary things, I'd say.
Yeah, there's reason for fear, and she calls fear a powerful emotion, but says that in the long term, that power can have the opposite of the intended effect. So fear can leave employees in a constant state of anxiety, which makes them unable to think clearly about threats. Also, too many kind of heavy-handed scare tactics from an employer might make a worker more disgruntled or uninterested in security, sort of triggering the rebellious nature of people, thinking that threats are exaggerated and that bosses don't trust them to do the right thing.
Right, so it's kind of a bit of a two-pronged issue where you can scare people too much and then they're so full of anxiety that they don't know what to click, and so they click nothing at all, or maybe they click everything. Who knows?
Yep.
And then on the other side of the coin, you got the people that hear the fear message over and over and say, screw this, I don't care, this isn't real. So
yeah,
that's probably an issue in the real world, but carrying over to cybersecurity training makes sense to me.
Yeah. Basically, both prongs that are mentioned here have bad outcomes for the employee and the employer. So an example that's given here, for instance, is really dealing more with long-term behavior. So they point out that yes, you can scare people into installing some antivirus software or something like that, but a long-term behavior like making sure to keep up with your passwords and things of that nature are where the problems start to come in. So an example they give is that an employee is told during cyber awareness training that any email could be a phishing message. So if she clicks on an embedded link or opens an attachment, she learns in the training malware could be installed and she'll lose all the files on her machine and precipitate a major cyber incident at her workplace. So all of this just leaves her in a permanent state of uncertainty. And as you said, she just gets an email alert and then goes into the fetal position in the corner.
Just goes into panic mode.
Yeah.
So a lot of when we cover the tips and tricks for cybersecurity that, you see attached to the bottom of every article anyone reads about network security these days, one of the things that sort of comes up a lot is this idea of coming up with formal rules and making sure that the company's policy on cybersecurity is very clearly demarcated and in the official handbook, and in many cases have clear punishments as well. And so this article argues that perhaps that fear of punishment, while a nice idea on first sniff, really kind of creates more resentment and, even can kind of go too far in many cases.
Right. It actually suggests that the punishment will really double down the anxiety on an employee who might be concerned that they could be fired if they have anything to do with letting a breach occur in their workplace or getting docked pay. Those are a couple of consequences, like real consequences that some workplaces have in effect. But an employee who's already involved in a breach, they didn't want to have been breached in the first place. So they already feel bad that they were deceived in the first place. And now if they get punished and publicly punished in some form or fashion, that actually leads to the equivalent of physical pain at being shamed. So that doesn't seem like a very good outcome.
Right, like kicking someone while they're down, basically. They've already been duped and feel bad about that, feel bad about risking the company's data, etc., and then stick their face on their employee refrigerator and says, "Hey, you're shame this man." So the idea of using these punishments, they outline a few in the article, including a UK company that fines up to 50% of employees' salaries if they fell for a message or fired them if they fell for such messages 3 times. That could be a little bit going overboard. And when you start sowing, doubt and distrust in your workplace, things can go downhill pretty fast in morale. And low morale is not good for cybersecurity either.
Right. And they actually got a lot of this information by surveying 400 workers in a study. Response to the use of cybersecurity fear appeals, about 32% said it's not okay to exaggerate the threat, even if it means people will take action. So they don't want you making something even bigger than it actually is. I think a straight talk approach that could still sow some fear would be okay, but they don't want to hear that by clicking on a malicious attachment that the building will explode or something like that.
If you click a phishing email, this whole building will be on fire.
Yeah.
So they do give some ideas behind what does work as far as sort of patrolling all this and making sure that your team is up to snuff and not only knows about this, but has some resources to go to sort of make them feel a little more safe and secure. One of which is creating a buddy system. And I don't think what they described here is so much a buddy, so much it is as a primary contact for, something like a phishing email. That way, in each department in the company, if somebody suspects that they're being phished, they can reach out to somebody familiar, somebody they work with in person and, already know and trust and are able to say, "Hey, can you give me some assistance in identifying this email?" And then that person would also be able to very quickly roll out warnings to the rest of the team in the case of a legitimate attack.
Yeah, it's sort of a cybersecurity team captain for each department in a workplace so that if you as an individual are a little concerned about something, you don't have to dig around and find somebody in IT who you never talked to and don't know and maybe are a little reticent to pour your guts out at if you happen to have clicked something that you were a little unsure about. So yeah, the buddy nature is more just, I think, having a relationship with somebody that you work with on a day-to-day basis who maybe is a little bit extra trained in cybersecurity awareness compared to your average employee.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, picking a buddy, so to speak, that would, be able to have some people skills and say, hey, thanks for, bringing this to my attention. Let's check it out together. Let's use this as a learning event. That helps rather than just having some faceless IT ticketing system that says we'll get back to you in 2 to 3 business days with an answer.
Yeah, so the second prong is providing adequate resources. So in this case, they're talking about password manager as something to offer rather than just expecting people to create their own strong passwords. Now, I mean, really, most people can figure it out on their own that there's a password manager option out there. I mean, even if just in a Google account, they have a password manager, but there are plenty of other password manager options. But again, just making that easier and more accessible to people so that it doesn't scare them that they have to create 10 different passwords for 10 different accounts and change them every 2 weeks and still keep that locked in the memory bank.
Right. And in addition to adding these resources, there's also the idea of removing obstacles. So, for example, organizations who forbid the use of USB memory sticks might inadvertently create a situation where, employees don't really know what to do as an alternative. And so, they're going to just go ahead and email those files directly or choose some other less secure way to do it than if you were to just provide them with an encrypted memory stick to be used for work purposes only, in which case they would choose that as their primary resource. And that obstacle has been removed and it ensures that they're choosing the more safe method rather than sort of improving on their own.
Yeah, and really this piece in a nutshell is talking about cybersecurity concerns affecting productivity at work. So they're trying to offer some options to keep people thinking about cybersecurity, but keep them productive at the same time. And, I think it's not necessarily a different angle than the training your employees side of things. It's just keep some other factors in mind as you're planning your approach for a cybersecure organization. Now, headline number 3. FBI warns hackers are using hijacked home security devices for swatting. So we talked about a little tease of this particular story earlier on. Stolen email passwords are being used to hijack smart home security systems to, quote, swat unsuspecting users. According to the FBI, the announcement comes after concerned device manufacturers alerted law enforcement about the issue.
Yeah, so for those of you not sure what swatting is, this is something that I believe grew in the gaming community. So you'd be watching a Twitch gamer doing their live stream, and suddenly somebody has called 911 on their behalf and said that there's a terrible, dangerous emergency going on in their house. And then suddenly you've got the SWAT team kicking in their front door midstream, and I guess people enjoyed watching that. And so this is now being extended to sort of take advantage of these vulnerabilities in systems such as Ring and Nest and other home alarm and video camera systems.
Yeah, so instead of just a call from maybe a spoofed line or something to 911, these are saying actually that hackers using email credentials that they've stolen are actually making the call to the police from these smart devices. So from the Ring doorbell camera, for instance, or something like that. So makes it even tougher to trace, and it seems like it's coming from the house.
Right, and so last December, Vice actually did a report on a podcast named Noldcast, which live streamed its content to Discord, where in one incident, a criminal actor hijacked a Ring smart home video and audio and used it to harass the residents of the home, including speaking to their young children through the device in their bedroom and claiming to be Santa Claus.
Yeah.
So that's a little creepy.
A little bit creepy, yeah. And so the FBI is saying, swatting is sometimes motivated by revenge, used as a form of harassment, or used as a prank. But it can have deadly consequences. We've seen some stories in the past where, somebody might claim that somebody has a gun in the house or something like that, or a bomb or something of that nature. And as you said, the SWAT team comes in, and the SWAT team's not coming in just to knock on the door and say, is everything okay in there? They're coming in there expecting a fight. So
mistakes happen.
mistakes happen. And so these have had some deadly consequences before. And as you said, a lot of times in the past, they were associated with gaming. Maybe somebody was doing a little too well on on a game that they were playing online with other folks. Maybe some cheating going on or something like that. And so the penalty being a swatting kind of situation, which maybe the magnitude of the response a little outweighed the offense in the first place.
Right. Or just a plain old mean prank, which the internet is well known for.
And you can hide behind your computer to do it, so you don't have to feel so bad about the prank.
Right. And earlier, as we were talking about IoT devices and sort of these second, third wave, cheaper brands that come on the market, this is especially a concern with this type of attack, because while Ring and Nest are, they're legitimate large companies out there coming up with new and innovative ways to protect and secure people's systems, there's going to be, knockoff brands and cheaper brands available where maybe that extra due diligence is not done.
Yeah. And so it really means that if you want to get in on the smart home revolution, you really need to think about security, not only of the device itself, but also your own general network security hygiene, because the FBI's PSA that came out on this said, to gain access to the smart devices, offenders are likely taking advantage of customers who reuse their email passwords for their smart device. The offenders use stolen email passwords to log into the smart device and hijack features, including the live stream camera and device speakers. So if you're a gamer, for instance, and you use a common email and password there, and someone was able to hack it in some way, shape, or form, then they may have tried out that same credential on your doorbell or camera or anything like that, and that's where this comes from.
Right, and in February 2020, Ring actually did add some layers of security, including a mandatory two-factor auth system, which can be circumvented still, so, still keep up with those strong passwords.
I think just in general, this is another sort of warning out there that there are all sorts of methods that people are attempting to use. And I think going back to the whole creepy factor of this is that, when they do this, they already have access to your cameras and devices. So they not only call from the device or place a message into law enforcement from the device, but they can watch it all play out. So it's a entertainment factor, I guess, for the prank, which then, magnitude of that wise can even go beyond and be used as a live stream of the SWAT.
Yeah, that was one instance I mentioned here of offenders live streaming the swatting incident on a shared online platform. So it's a bit of a Truman Show aspect to all this as well. So, if you've got cameras and speakers and microphones all over your house and those get hacked, then it's a pretty large privacy violation on their part.
Yeah, so you just really have to keep that security in mind if you're going to make your home smart, make your security smart too.
Right. And one last quote from the article here states that the consumer device field is extremely competitive and purchase decisions are often based on a price difference of just a few dollars or less. And the consumer really needs to understand that any additional security features are likely going to impact that price. And so if you are cheaping out on a piece of technology, the security may be exactly why that price is lower.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Ping, a Firewalls.com podcast. Check out the links in the description for more information about everything we discussed. Subscribe or follow now, however you listen, to ensure you get our latest episodes as soon as they're available. And please do rate and review us. Visit Firewalls.com for all your network security needs and give us a follow on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. For Andrew Harmon, I'm Kevin Baxter. We'll be back soon with another episode, but in the meantime, we remind you to get secure, stay secure.